We have a number of church leaders now who have been invited to ask questions, and the first of those is Archbishop Philip Wilson, the President of the Catholic Bishops' Conference. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you. Prime Minister, what are the personal qualities opposed to the political qualities that you believe are necessary for authentic leadership, and what role, if any, has religious faith had in forming your leadership qualities?
Well, Your Grace, a very strong belief in what you want to achieve for your country is the first requirement. Not necessarily in any order, but other requirements are extraordinary physical stamina. Public life, particularly in 2007, is physically very demanding. I keep reading about how Bob Menzies used to take 3 weeks to get to a Commonwealth conference in London, and he travelled by ship. For that kind of opportunity these days. My Christian beliefs have influenced me. I spoke earlier of the 2 parables, and I really return to that because I've always seen the parable of the talents as being that great free enterprise parable, the one that says you should use your resources wisely and you should invest them wisely, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I've also seen, along with that, I've seen the parable of the Good Samaritan as being very much one that's directed towards that great thing about Christianity, and also that great thing about Australian society, that every person has an intrinsic value and an intrinsic worth. And we're rightly proud of our egalitarianism. We're rightly proud of the fact that if you've got a new health product on the market, and if you've got a new way of saving a life, then that product and that way of saving the life has got to be available to everybody. I mean, I admire the United States over many, many things, but I don't admire their social welfare system. So I think their social welfare system is too harsh, and it lacks an adequate safety net. I've got to say, just to even the ledger, though, that I don't particularly admire the social welfare system of many European countries, because I think their social welfare system is too paternalistic and doesn't do enough to encourage self-help and self-reliance. I think you've got to achieve a balance between caring for people who genuinely fall between the cracks with a genuine safety net, but by the same token not have one that's so paternalistic that you don't encourage self-reliance.
Thanks, Prime Minister. The second question is from the Right Reverend Bob Thomas, the Moderator General of the Presbyterian Church in Australia.
Mr Howard, many people in the churches feel that while the conservative side of politics is strong on traditional moral issues, it seems to lack compassion for the more vulnerable people in the society. But tonight you seem to have canvassed a wide range of issues that may well put those fears to rest. Perhaps you could elaborate for us some ways in which the churches could work more effectively with the government to achieve these common aims.
Well, sir, I want to fully involve the churches in advising me and advising the government, and where their agencies think it appropriate, participating in the provision of services. One of the very first meetings I had when I became Prime Minister was a meeting in Sydney with a group of people that were dealing with the problem of youth homelessness, and it included a number of church leaders, and it began a process of consulting what the Americans call faith-based agencies to develop policy. Now, this was criticised. I mean, there are a lot of people now who say they're all in favour of it, and I won't try and bring politics into this, but they weren't much in favour of it, many of them, back in 1996, and it was a fairly unusual thing to talk about a church agency running a job network and being a job provider. And I know it caused a lot of debate inside the churches themselves. It probably still does. And I respect that fact. But I've always had the view that if you really want to get accurate advice about a social welfare problem, better to talk to an organisation like St Vincent de Paul or the Salvation Army, because they've had more practical experience of dealing with those problems than with great respect to them. I'm not knocking bureaucrats. They're a very dedicated group of people than many people in the bureaucracy or indeed many members of Parliament. So I want to have the churches involved not only to the extent they are now but to an increasing degree, and I've tried to keep open lines of communications with the churches, not only on issues like stem cell research and RU486, where it is true that the great bulk of the members of the two parties that I lead, the Liberal Party and the National Party, did take a conservative position, as indeed I did, in exercising my conscience vote. And it's a principle of the Liberal Party, and I think generally of the National Party, that on those issues people have a conscience vote. You can't impose a party discipline, and you shouldn't try to. But exercising a conscience vote, the great bulk of my colleagues, not all of them, but voted in a particular direction. There is one thing that your question prompted me to recall that I should have mentioned in my address when I was listing the things that I did specifically to promote a Christian view of society, and that is the amendment to the Marriage Act that our government introduced. The amendment to the Marriage Act, which made it very clear that as far as we were concerned and as far as the Parliament was concerned, and it did pass through without objection, that marriage was a voluntary union for life of a man and a woman to the exclusion of all others. Now, that is our view of marriage. It remains our view, and it will always be our view of marriage, and it can only be the view that a Christian society should have of marriage.
Thanks, Prime Minister. The next question is from someone who's very, very much involved with church work to the poor, and that's Mr Peter Kell, the CEO of Anglicare in Sydney.
Prime Minister, I note what you've already said about the care for the vulnerable and what you've said about industrial relations reform, but my concern behind this question is about life balance. In a range of public policy areas, the achievement of a reasonable work-life balance becomes more difficult, and I'm thinking of things like the cost of childcare, working conditions, work choices, employment security, housing affordability, family support issues, those kind of things. There's a risk of growing inequality in the nation. What are you prepared to do in the next 3 years to make a fairer, more balanced family life more achievable for Australians?
Well, thank you very much, Mr Kell. The first and most important thing we can do is to continue to run a strong economy. Now, some might say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But it's true. I hear a lot about working families. Well, you've got to have a strong economy before you can have families in work. And we have to strive to maintain choice when it comes to the care of children. I still believe very strongly that where parents want a situation where one of them stays at home full-time for a while when children are very young, they ought to be able to do so, because I actually believe that that is a good form of childcare. Now, having said that, but I also recognise that people want choice. There was a British sociologist who said that you really had three groups of mothers in society. You had those who saw themselves as overwhelmingly home-based, had those who saw themselves as career-oriented, and those who sought to blend the two. And that third group was by far the largest. And what we have to do is to have policies where people can effectively choose. And I would like to continue to promote that choice. I mean, we've done quite a lot, and I don't want to bore you with statistics and everything, that the family tax benefit system has given a much fairer deal to people who want to exercise the choice to have a person at home for a while, full-time and then part-time into the workforce, and either then going on to full-time into the workforce or perhaps remaining part-time. We also, of course, need to have adequate childcare facilities. I think we need to be a bit more flexible in the future in relation to the provision of childcare facilities by business, and to encourage more businesses perhaps with a more flexible approach to provide more childcare opportunities. I'm not in favour of mandating paid parental leave on small business, because I think it could result in some unfortunate consequences for some people who could find themselves employed by smaller businesses that simply can't afford it. But we will continue to encourage the provision of parental leave, and we now have a situation that paid parental leave is about 47% for women and 40% for men. We do have the right to 52 weeks unpaid parental leave enshrined in legislation, and we have, of course, recently increased the childcare cash benefit and provided for the lump sum payment of the childcare cash rebate. The baby bonus, which has been a bit controversial in some circles, has proved to be extremely valuable for some low-income families, particularly having their first child, helping to cushion the transition from both parents being into the workforce with only one being in the workforce for a period of time. I always think policies in this area are a work in progress. You can never declare victory in relation to the family work balance and go home. I think you always have to find different ways of responding to community needs, and it remains what I might loosely call the perennial barbecue stopper, one that does concern people. And but the key word in the workplace with this is flexibility. If we go back to a system that mandates rigidity, I think we'll have less satisfactory results.
Prime Minister, the next question is Pastor Keith Ains, the Secretary of the Australian Christian Churches.
Prime Minister, we appreciate the fact that the Australian Parliamentary Day has always commenced with Christian prayers as a reflection of the Christian heritage that you've spoken about. In the light of the fact that the US Congress recently opened its proceedings with Hindu prayers and the pressure that's being placed to remove the Christian influence in Parliament, can you give us an assurance of any future government of yours, or for a future government of yours, that Christian prayers will be maintained for the opening of each parliamentary day?
Well, I can, unqualifiedly. Yes, there'll be no change. I don't say that disrespectfully of other religions, but the predominant religious culture of this country is Christianity, and I mean, I always find it odd that you have to demonstrate your tolerance by denying your own heritage. It has always annoyed me immensely that some department stores in this country abandoned nativity scenes because they said they were offensive to Jews and Muslims. None of the Jews and Muslims I know, and I know quite a number, have ever expressed any objection to me about nativity scenes in department stores, any more than Catholics and Protestants living in Indonesia would express any objection legitimately to the predominant religious practices of that predominantly Muslim country. I mean, this is a form of absurd political correctness of which I've been, as you know, something of a critic.
We'll now invite Ms Carolyn Kitto from World Vision Australia to ask a question.
Prime Minister, Carolyn Kitto, World Vision Australia. It's been said that there are no votes in aid, and perhaps the fact that you've already raised that question tonight indicate that there may be a shift. Australians have been engaged strongly in campaigns such as Make Poverty History and the Churches in Micah Challenge, and polls show increasing satisfaction with that aid and a desire for Australia to respond to human need. We praise the increases of your government in aid. and yet it is still half of the 0.7% of gross national income, which is the target for OECD countries. What is your personal position on Australia's response to global poverty, and will the government be seeking to further grow its generosity to match where the rest of the world is heading?
Well, perhaps I could better phrase it in answer to your question than I did in my speech. I think the long-term way out of poverty for areas of the world such as Africa in particular, and bear in mind that what's really happened is that there has been a remarkable improvement in Asia, a remarkable improvement, and quite literally hundreds of millions of people have been taken out of poverty in many parts of Asia over the last 20 years. But Africa remains the disaster area as far as aid is concerned, and it's compounded by the extraordinary and terrible prevalence of HIV/AIDS. But I mean, I believe the fundamental problem with Asia, with Africa, is the absence of any structure of proper governance. I mean, nobody can suggest that the catastrophe which is now Zimbabwe is in any way is overwhelmingly due to the absence of aid from countries such as Australia. It's the corruption of the political process and the refusal of those countries that could have brought pressure to bear on the regime in Zimbabwe to change its practices, which is more responsible for the situation in Zimbabwe than anything else. Now, having said that, I don't suggest that there isn't a proper role for aid. We have announced very significant increases. There is a greater interest in and support for this in the broader community, and there are a lot of people inside the government who, including, I mean, the two people most directly involved apart from me are the Treasurer and the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and they are working together very closely on this, and I know from discussions with them, both of them share a very strong commitment to further increases. We support the UN 0.7 as an aspiration, but we don't support at this stage a time-bound target to reach the goal, but we will continue to lift our aid towards the doubling figure that I mentioned in my speech, and we've reached the goal of we'll have 0.35 of gross national income by 2010. I think you can be assured that there will be continued further increases, but you can't see, if I may say so respectfully, aid as being the sole solution. We've got to do something about governance and corruption in these countries. It's appalling, absolutely appalling. And I mean, the way in which the denial of food has been used as a political weapon in many countries in Africa is the most appalling thing that I think I've seen in anywhere. And the other thing we have to be conscious of is the obligation of the world to reduce their trade barriers. I mean, if you freed developing countries of all the barriers against agricultural exports, that would do wonderful things for their economies.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister. We very much appreciate that. In the job that I do up in the Parliament, I'm able to be a spectator of this sport of politics, but not actually too involved in it, I suppose, to affect my family. But I do know the incredible cost, personal cost, that politics actually demands of people. And, Prime Minister, you've given us a great example. As I said, you provided great leadership to the country, and we really do appreciate your commitment, your dedication. There's no job in politics which demands more, and thank you very much on behalf of all of us.
Thank you.